Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the Costume Stuff Podcast, or whatever you want to call this new segment to the Star Wars Stuff Podcast Network. My name is Hunter.
I'm Colin.
I'm Batman.
Yep. I forgot who I was. I'm Star.
Oh.
Well, sorry about the confusion there, where I switched up and I decided to open this one. So we got all out of order. Usually it's Colin in the top corner, and then we go from there, but we kind of went in reverse this time.
It works.
So today, we are going to talk about specifically the research side of building costumes. It's something that I think is kind of overlooked when it comes to costume building. There's two main sides to it, or at least how I see it. Anybody else can jump in and tell me if they think I'm wrong. But there's the side of research that pertains to reference material and figuring out like what you're building and like what it's going to look like. But then there's the other side of it, which is research as it pertains to new skills. And there's definitely a distinction there. So we're going to hit on both of those today. But I think we're going to start with research as it pertains to learning about the costume that you're going to build. And we have some pretty varied experience here as far as what people have built or not built or whatever for animated costumes or realistic costumes and anything in between. So to start it off, we'll talk about researching the reference material for what costumes are going to look like. I know I'm kind of just monologuing here, but I was going to start with like what sources I generally use. And maybe we can go around and just say if like whatever sources people generally like to use for researching their costumes. And then from there, we can talk about the process of how we actually go about vetting those sources and gathering the material itself. So for me personally, this first source goes for literally everything, but screenshots are a big deal for this. So me personally, a lot of stuff that I build, I guess I was going to say a lot of it's live action, but I built a bunch of animated stuff too. You can take screenshots yourself. You can put the episode on pause and look at it, or you can use websites like CapThat or StarWarsScreenCaps.com. CapThat is great. It's a website that runs a Python script that takes a screenshot every 5 seconds of a specific show. And they do like all the Star Wars stuff, all the Marvel stuff, and that kind of thing. It takes them a few days usually to get through an episode, but generally that's one of the first places that I will look if it's something that's been out for a while. If it is a new show, like a new episode that just dropped, like last year when episode 5 of Ahsoka aired and I needed to see more of the clones, I went back and started taking screenshots myself. And that's kind of a tricky one too. And a lot of people will ask me questions about how I do that whenever I post them. But you can take them yourself. And the way you do that, at least I use Chrome, but browsers have a built-in functionality or feature whatever called hardware acceleration. You can go into your settings and turn that off. And that allows you to take screenshots of Disney Plus or Netflix or whatever, stuff that you would usually take a screenshot of and it's black. So yeah, those are kind of my main methods of researching. And then if it's a costume where there's a physical example of it, like something in the original trilogy, I will go and look online for any pictures of the actual prop from behind the scenes material or like visual dictionary stuff, or if there's a traveling museum exhibit and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I just kind of covered a whole bunch of things. But if anyone else has stuff they want to add for where you go to look for pictures of costumes or other stuff, go for it.
Well, I think one of the best methods, which is exactly what you talked about, which is doing screenshots. So there are certain characters like Rex and Boba Fett and stuff like that, where like you need like the actual like like there's certain parts in the armor that have to be exact for like to get approved for the 501st or the Revolution stuff. And then there's other builds as well, which I'm curious, starring Cap, when you guys were getting into your build, like of your first phone build, what was that process like? What was the research process like of getting into that? Because I think you guys were the first people I ever met that actually like made their costumes out of foam, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is fantastic. So I would love to hear of your process of what your research was like. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll hold off on like the process of how we learned how to foam smith until we kind of address that.
Yeah.
How do you build?
I'm sorry. I meant more the research.
No, you're good. But as far as like what kind of references we used for those builds themselves, Star Wars has this like, it's called the Cosplay Command Center. And on it they have a whole like PDF of the Bad Batch, and they've got them all from different angles. It's from the first season. And so we used those primarily when we were building and then painting and weathering the Bad Batch armor. And I definitely use it again. I'm building Hunter again with hard parts this time, so it doesn't fall apart so easily. But we use that. Another thing that I like to do is just play the episodes, which Hunter mentioned, literally watch the episodes. I get the it's nice that I have a lot of builds that are right from the Clone Wars show. So I just put on like the show, watch it, and watch the different lighting change. There was one time we were actually all hanging out at Colin's house, and we were playing Bad Batch, and I was weathering my season 3 helmet. And so I was like, Colin, back it up. And so we could just watch that episode as I was weathering the helmet and see the different lighting. So that's a lot of the research that I do. You probably have a similar answer.
I'd say the same. I like to just mainly do like just pausing in the middle of episodes and doing Sev. I played through a lot of the first chapter, the first mission in Republic Commando, and would just like stop when I was not being attacked and just like stare at Sev.
You like jumped on top of
on multiple
a box
That's
to
true.
look down and get an angle. To,
I
look
did.
at the top of Sev's shoulder. You were like, look, I got it. And like you're like standing on top of this box.
So
it was fun.
Lots of just like pausing and also just playing through stuff. Also, I'm very unhelpful right now, but they have 3D models of Delta Squad that Josh sent me, and I don't remember where they actually live, but there's 3D models of characters that people make, and that is so unhelpful. So that's kind of that's what I do.
At least pertaining to Delta Squad, there's sketch links that people did of
thank you.
the 4 Delta members. The dude who did it, his name's Jance. I don't know how. He also did like a bunch of like custom commandos that are also in that file, and there's some weird mesh issues with them. Like he added Fixer's backpack attachment on his own, so it's like scaled to a really weird position that's inaccurate. But you can look at least just the base file for the paint layout. Sev is also tinted really weirdly. Like he added a extra filter on it, so it's like darkened a lot.
And he doesn't have his Shen attachment.
Yeah, does he have the shoulder too?
He does have the shoulder, but not the Shen.
Okay. He also has like the version of boss that's not one of like 4 different boss versions that came out with that game. But aside from that, there's resources there for video game characters. You can get them modeled. There's game files that you can look at. That's really easy especially for video games. It's really easy to go in and get the specific color value that you want. It's not affected by trying to find the most Earth-like lighting environment, which is very variable. I also wanted to go back and touch on Hunter bringing up Cap, that it's great for like Marvel and Star Wars and all those like larger properties, but it's also sometimes you'll catch across like an older show that they might have gotten. So recently I did a build for an old show called Firefly, which is literally as old as I am. It came out the same year I was born.
I'm not very old.
Okay, screw you. But within reference, when you're trying to find references for a costume of a more niche property, you kind of there's like a checklist of things I'll go through, which first is just watching the show. And you kind of just focus only on the costume that you want to make. Try and like, okay, is this a view or does this show me part of the costume that isn't normally viewable? go through promotional images, knowing that normally promotional images are like an early version of a costume. It's not always the thing that's on screen. It's depending on what it is. Like,
Yeah,
that's what research is.
There's oftentimes research on where if it's a picture of the prop or costume that is not directly from the show, you do have to sometimes do a little bit of research as to where that photo was taken. For example, Boba Fett, probably the largest can of worms out there for this type of thing.
That's a barrel of monkeys, man. Don't even call it worms.
So there's multiple versions of Boba Fett seen on screen in the original trilogy, with the Return of the Jedi and the Empire kits. But then within those two divisions, there are multiple different versions of the kits for different hero and stunt costumes. And they would kind of mix and match those parts sometimes when they'd take this costume out for museum exhibits or whatever, show it off at celebrations. So you do need to be cognizant of that as well. Granted, that is a little bit of a special case because Boba Fett has more variation than usual.
Still, that brings up a really good point of hero versus stunt when it comes to costumes. So for those that don't know, hero is like the close-up, the beautiful, the things that costumers are probably going to spend hours and hours toiling over so that in up-close shots, it looks beautiful. But the materials that could be used just aren't conducive to like long shoots. So it's probably a heavy prop, or it's really weighty, or there's a myriad of reasons why there's going to be hero versus stunt versions of a prop. Stunt is kind of this catch-all term for rubber props, lighter versions, things that don't have as high of a fidelity. So it's, you don't really notice it when you're shooting something from a good distance, but it gets the idea across without being a huge issue. A really easy example of that is on the Batman film. The fidlocks on the biceps for the hero is an actual plastic fidlock with molding and detail and a metal bar. The stunt version is literally a rectangle of foam. That is all. There's nothing else there. So as Hunter said, there's a lot of researching about, what versions of a costume were used on screen, so you can kind of look through and understand the fidelity of what references you have available to you. Yeah. Other sites, just to quickly rattle off, the RPF is a beautiful forum that has a wealth of knowledge. Sometimes you got to go searching through it, but especially for older things, you can just go down a huge rabbit hole of reading what people have found out like 20 years ago. And some of those members are still active now, and you can shoot them a message and they'll respond.
Josh, do you want to fill people in on what the RPF is and what it stands for?
No, actually, I don't. So the RPF stands for the Replica Prop Forum. Craft Your Fandom is their header. It's just kind of this giant hive of nerds who want to make the most accurate stuff there is. There's references for, like, there's some people on this earth that have special brands of crazy. In aspects, I'm one of them, where like they want to replicate not just like what a costume looks like externally, but internally as well, like how it was strapped, all like the minute, intricate details that you don't see, which is a whole separate section of research. But yeah, that's what the RPF is. It's a forum similar to forums that the 501st has for specific costume detachments or anything else, but it's kind of this wide band of all of pop culture that it tries to cover under its net for people to share.
Yeah, maybe we should talk about forums in general too, because they can, and this will sort of segue us into the talking about the 501st and its CRL library. I saw we had a question about that. So forums, for people that aren't aware, they are kind of the precursor to social media, as far as like instant social media goes. So forums, it's a web page, and then on that web page, there's a bunch of different subcategories called subforums. It's sort of like Reddit. A lot of people are familiar with Reddit nowadays. It's kind of like a less expansive version of Reddit, but it's broken down into like nested categories as things get more specific. And then when you get to the bottom level, there are posts called threads, which are your main like areas where people actually post things. So the RPF, for example, there's a Star Wars section on there, and you go into the Star Wars prop replica section, and then under that, they have all the threads relating to Star Wars props that people build. And within those threads, you just kind of got to go off the title if it's something that's going to be relevant to your build. And then from there, you can sift through the thread. They go in chronological order of posts or replies in them. And then you just kind of have to keep digging. It's not quite as easy as social media. And then like search functions don't necessarily work as well. And nowadays they seem kind of archaic, but they have such a wealth of knowledge. Josh mentioned how long the RPF has been around. It's been around for a long time, started by some really passionate people. So there's a wealth of knowledge there that you can look back and learn from. Or find like, hey, someone's already collected all these reference pictures for the same kind of build that you want to do. And that's super helpful because it saves you a lot of work. And then Josh also mentioned the 501st forums as well. So within the 501st, there's different groups called detachments that focus on a specific costume type. And each of those attachments will have a forum and the same kind of thing. It's broken up and organized the same way, but there's usually quite a few years worth of knowledge built up there. And it's a really great resource, even if you're not wanting to join the 501st. Just a great place to learn about the costumes themselves and research on how to build them and stuff.
Hunter, I had this question when I was first looking at stuff with the 501st. So I'm asking this for people who may not know a lot about the 501st. Are those forums public? Can people who are not like wanting to make a account, can they look at all the resources?
Some of the forums you do have to make an account to see. Not all the forums need an account to view things, but they are free to the public to make accounts even if you're not a 501st member, because they're there to help new people learn. So we want general members of the public to find those forums and join them and learn stuff there. Go ahead, Josh.
Do we still want to talk 501st? Because I just had like a brain explosion of another site that's wonderful for references.
Yeah, let me talk about the CRL library first, since we had a questions on there. So the 501st Legion also has the CRL library. It's kind of a redundant name. People call them CRLs and they say CRL library, but CRL stands for Costume Reference Library. So the 501st, in order to join, you have to have a costume that meets a certain standard of accuracy. And those CRLs are posted on the 501st website for anyone to view. You don't need an account or anything, but it outlines the standards that you need to meet for approval. To have a costume that is accurate enough for joining the Legion. So like a certain degree of matching the movie. So the CRLs, the question here was, how are CRLs made? Is it one person or a lot of people working on it? So they are developed by the detachments that we just mentioned. And then going from there, it's usually driven by a member, not necessarily a single person or not necessarily a single member of the staff, but it's driven by someone wanting to build this costume for the first time. And then there'll be a thread on that forum that breaks down the whole build and research process and stuff. And that's usually a bunch of people contributing to it, or if it's a slower detachment or a more niche costume, then there's less people that contribute to it.
Yeah.
God, do I love Prop Store.
Oh,
their
Prop
site,
fantastic.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Such a wonderful site. They're an auction house that auction off nerds, I can't say that word, all the time. And it's amazing because they'll take like every possible angle you could feasibly imagine. They'll have a bunch of background information on where it came from, what it was used, like all that. Sometimes they'll even have like measurement sticks next to what it is, and like the focal lengths on the camera are beautifully set. I recently worked on redoing parts of the Batman because I said it was done and I lied. But yeah, screw you. So I had to redo the sticky bomb gun and the sticky bombs, and we were trying to figure out the rough scaling of it and trying to find out like what the holster they had, because I knew it was the same one used on the film, and But they had they just came out with a single sticky bomb from the film, and they had a ruler next to us. We could use that to like get the scaling and like everything we could possibly want, and then off of that, take the scaling, the sticky bomb over to like every other file that we were working on, and know that it was really close to being in scale, which is a lot farther than most people would go to make a costume prop.
Yeah.
But it's a wonderful resource with a bunch of views, especially for some stuff that could be pretty obscure.
Another one to name too is Heritage Auctions. Similar site that auctions off screen use or just general movie memorabilia. And they post really high res pictures. They have a catalog for each of their auctions, so you can go back to and look at previous stuff, which is fantastic. And then they have for the, I don't know how long they keep them on their website, but like the recent ones they have up there too.
Yeah, no, it's God, I love Prop Store. I've been staring at their site so much for R2X2.
Yeah. Yeah, right now, right now there is a R3, the R3 dome from Empire Strikes Back, the orange one from Echo Base is up for auction.
That's transparent.
Yeah, it's sick, and you can see
So
all the
beautiful.
details in there. But bidding starts at $20,000, and I don't have that kind of money to spend on it.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where you look at it and you're like, God, I love the references, and then you look at it a bit longer, you're like, God, I do not have this kind of money.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I never really got the chance to talk about my research of my research process for Chewie because it's a little different than doing armor. So Hunter, going back to what he said, there's and Hunter, you're gonna have to remind me. There's the screen caption site where it's got like every single screenshot.
Yes, so actually, I should like read off that URL for people because it's super helpful.
Wait, I workshopped a joke
idea
about this because I've explained it to so many people.
No, I'm telling you, this helped me in the long run. Just because for Chewie, there is like a specific spot of where like his hair stops, and you have to know exactly where. Because if you mess up on one leg, you're gonna mess up on the other, and then it's gonna look like the gray is like weird and stuff like that. So that site really helped me out. Hunter, go ahead and name it.
I was gonna say maybe I should just wait until we're done with this research section, and then we can all just list off all the sources together, and then like in the show notes we can put timestamp. Hey, we list off all our research sources.
So the other thing about legacy characters as well is like they're not always going to wear the same costume. With Chewie, his costume's very similar like throughout the entire trilogy, except maybe you have like a face hair kind of like hanging down, which I know most of you like, the leg of the hair kind of drooping. I at first didn't like it because I was like, I want the New Hope style, I want all that combed back, but But then afterwards, I was like, you know what? It does kind of give it that like classic look. But the important thing was like of doing the research of how other, of latch hooking. For example, the thing I did was exactly what they did when they created the costume all the way back in 1976. So of that latch hooking process, I didn't know what I was doing. And shout out to Craig Hobbs. I feel like we're gonna give him a shout out like on every episode, but him and I both learned that process at the same time. We just looked up a bunch of different YouTube videos until we found one. I can't remember for the life of me of the person's name. I think it wasn't even hair, it was yarn. And then like we tested something new, and then I just started the process from there. But something else that helped me was joining a Facebook group called the Wookiee Builders, and there's so many people in there that have different. Sorry,
Colin, I think you're moving on to our next segment. Process.
That was
God.
It was part of my research process because I joined that group and I looked at how other people built the costumes.
Right. Yeah, and that's it. So I just before we segue into how we learn how to build costumes, I want to like end cap our gathering reference material half of the show. So to recap sources, and I know I'm going to forget them.
Wait, we got one more behind the scenes content, videos or like deleted scenes from movies.
So important.
they have either comedic gold or they have views of unedited versions of the costumes, so you can see what they look like without filters that are put on a movie
Yeah.
for post processing. There's no color grading; it's just the raw costumes in footage, which can be extremely helpful, even if not getting a new view of a costume. Like if you're looking for the
Yeah.
back of a certain character and you're not getting it, you're still getting what the color of that costume looks like, which is really beneficial.
Yeah.
But also just cut content behind the scenes. Sometimes they'll even have like views of the costumers like working and building the costumes, and you can pause it and be like, oh, the thread is tan.
I think one good reference of like behind the scenes content is the complete saga Blu-ray disc where it's episode 1 through 6. On like each disc, there is like, I think you'll be watching the movie and then like a small like kind of a small box in the corner will pop up, and then you would click it and then it would break down like this prop or costume for about like 5 to 10 minutes, and they were talking about how they built it and stuff. So that is one good reference. If you go on Disney Plus, they also have a bunch of the behind the scenes stuff too. But watching that behind the scenes stuff is a really good research thing, just because most likely they'll have the costume that you're looking for in there. Clone Wars and different animated stuff like of what Cap and Star were talking about, like just keep rewatching that because they really don't have like those costume references unless you go on StarWars.com, and then they have like all the clones like in those weird T poses. Because I remember looking up that stuff,
which I wish they did that for more.
I know.
I remember they published those and like a bunch of people commented on it. Like it was huge. Like, guys, like go comment that we want more of these.
Yeah, and they never did.
No, they never did.
Incredibly sad.
Yeah. Also, I'm on such a Firefly research bender from Mal of deep bowels of the internet. Another like odd case that some costumes have is that they normally this is outside of Star Wars or like things that they kind of are a lot more protective of their costumes, but they'll let them be used in other shows. Like other shows will just like use the same stuff.
Yep.
So finding out like, oh, is there a reference to X show in Y? And
Yep.
it could be another use of finding another
Or-
view of like Mal's holster.
This happens a lot in the original trilogy. So a lot of the props from filming overseas at Pinewood in the UK were taken from prop houses around there, like Bapti or other prop houses. So they appeared in other things before Star Wars or after Star Wars, like the Bosk flight suit was in Doctor Who and some other stuff before it made it to Star Wars.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of different weapons throughout Star Wars 2 that were used in World War II, and then they just added like different things to it as well. So
Yeah, I mean, most of the weapons in
Yeah.
the original trilogy were modified on top of deactivated weapons from the World Wars.
Mhm.
So-
Temporarily modified too, so they could take it off and give them back to the
yeah,
Yeah.
original owners.
Yep. Sometimes, not always. but
Sometimes, yeah, not always. Yeah. Like I don't think Hans specifically, like someone found the movie that Mauser was used in beforehand by like some scuff on the side of the body.
Yes.
that's
super
crazy.
weird.
Yeah.
Any
So-
other like places, not like places to look for reference, or in the process of researching areas to think or look for before we start listing links from people?
I think that covers it for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say Hunter has been this close of going forward, and then John could be like, "All right, hang on, wait a second."
Yeah.
Oh, because like there's more stuff to
the
talk about
question
before we
goes
just
to
go
you.
link crazy.
The question goes to you, Josh. Do you have anything else you'd like to bring up?
This is a wonderful, wonderful question, Hunter. I'm so glad you asked.
Let's see. Can
Okay, so
All right.
Perfect.
Okay, so I guess starting from the top, we have actual screen caps, either taken yourself by turning off hardware acceleration or pausing the show. Screen caps from websites like capthat.com, which is cap-that.com, or Star Wars Screen Caps. I believe it's .net. .com, sorry. Star Wars Screen Caps.com also has some good ones. We have the behind the scenes material, photos from traveling museum exhibits, which is kind of like the same thing as behind the scenes material. We have prop store. We have the 501st CRL library. Anything else?
I don't think so. I mean, if for the people watching live, if you guys know any other links that we haven't said, put that in the comment section. But I think that's everything.
Yeah, and I think some of those kind of fall under the more general categories like behind the scenes material and stuff too.
Yeah.
No.
So the next thing that we were going to talk about was how to go about researching to learn new skills, because it's a really different process than just looking at pictures of costumes to collect them, So, and that to me is actually more daunting a lot of the time because there's just an absolute ton of information out there. And there's also the choice of deciding how you want to go about making something if there's multiple ways to go about it. So someone else go first.
Okay.
Well, we can jump in and say how not to do it. And then you guys could all come in and say, like, oh no, God, don't do that. So we should probably do that. So the problem we have is, one, we're on a really
Impulsive.
Yeah. Actually, that's the entire
Oh,
point.
no.
That is well, okay, so we are though. We'll see something. We watched the Bad Batch, back in 2021, knew nothing about the 501st, and we'll be like, oh my God, we want to build those costumes. We know nothing. So we just grabbed some foam.
Well, we didn't even know anything about phone building. We knew nothing about
I
phone
think
building.
you looked up something online, maybe.
I looked up how to make like cosplay, and they're like, use foam, and I was like, cool.
We're like, okay, so we slapped
it.
a bunch of foam on top of football
But
pads.
I didn't know what to glue it with, so
I know.
like we don't. Yeah,
No,
we
so
don't
we,
research.
it's
Wait,
a
what glue
disaster.
did you use?
Hot glue at
Hot
first.
glue. So we just hot glued
It did
a bunch
melt.
of foam.
At one point.
Yeah,
in
it
my
melted
car.
when we were in
Yeah.
the Mojave Desert, but that's another story.
Yes.
But anyway, so what we do is trial by
Error.
an error. So we will just see something, get really excited, and then start experimenting. And so you ought to research stuff. So do whatever these guys tell you.
I'm going to jump in
It's
here
fun.
and say that's not always a bad way to do it.
Yeah.
Going into a build process and being okay with the fact that things may not turn out that great the first time and you're just going to redo them is a really healthy mindset to go into it with. It's not good to go in and expect perfection when you're trying to work on a new skill that some people like even go to school for or something like that,
That's fair. And
so-
it just makes me think of one of my favorite first memories of Hunter. Actually, I was trying to latex mold some Montrals for Ahsoka, and I didn't know how to do this. So again, this is me just jumping in and being like, I read like one thing about like you make a form and then you paint some latex on and you call it good. And so I do this, and then I'm like, oh my God, how do I get it off my mold? And I put it on my story, and Hunter at the time, like, I think I'd exchanged 2 words with this guy. And he's like, did you use mold release by chance? And I was like, what is mold release? So yeah, also, good resources is asking people in the community who have maybe done it a little more than you.
Very general Googling. Also good. The way I kind of approach research is like you get this like really, really broad Google search, and then you kind of funnel it down as you learn more and more to be more and more specific. So like when I learned mold making, I think it started because tested.com had some videos about mold making, and that was kind of my general basis of knowledge about that. And then they did things in the video or mentioned things that I hadn't heard of before. And then from there, it was like, okay, I'm going to Google this thing that I don't know. And I kind of narrowed it down from there. Me personally, I do like to start by looking at similar processes that people have done, or if they've like built the same thing that I want to build. Colin mentioned Facebook groups earlier, and this may be a good place for Colin to jump in and talk about that process for his Chewy, but Facebook groups also tie in what Sergeant Cap just mentioned about asking other people in the community. which that is honestly how I have learned the most, is reaching out to people and talking to people, because sometimes you get to a point in your research where you've gone down this YouTube rabbit hole and like the answer you want is here, and the rabbit hole just kind of goes like this right past it, and you don't really know, you never really got the answer that you were specifically looking for. And sometimes you learn what questions to ask by doing your research. It sounds kind of weird, but like I research questions to ask about stuff because and I get this a lot too. And I wish I could respond to all these messages that I get that are just super general. Like, hey, how do you build a costume? Or, hey, how do you build a droid? Or, I want to do what you do. How do you do that? Like I physically just cannot, because it's been years of me learning, and there's so many different ways to go about every single costume, and there's so many different costumes and droids and stuff that it helps when you go into asking questions of other people in the community who may have more experience. It helps when you have a little bit of tangential knowledge to kind of know what someone's talking about. So yeah, I guess that's my general tip, and a great place to go about figuring out what kind of questions to ask, or who to ask questions of, or where to ask questions is Facebook groups. So Colin, maybe it's good for Colin to just kind of talk to his process on Chewy.
Yeah. So and the next thing I'm gonna add this to as well, actually goes towards all costume building, everything, is also when you're doing your research on how to build stuff, you also want to kind of research how much everything is gonna cost as well. Because there are costumes that are kind of, that are kind of pricey more than others. And then, if you're in that field of doing different commissions for people or stuff like that, some people don't realize how much work and how much like the costume actually costs. Just because if you look at Chewy, it's just like, oh, okay, it is just a bunch of hair. But at the same time, it's like, it's kind of expensive. Like, so
it's so much hair.
Yeah, right. Right. So, and when I did my research process for Chewy, I really didn't know anyone that really was a Chewy builder. I know a couple of people that have their Chewies, but I really didn't have access to go like talk to them and stuff like that. So I joined this Facebook group, and then I met Nathan Ritchie, who made my mask, and not only did he give me tips there, but he like on how to groom it and make it look screen accurate and like throughout the time that you use it. But he also gave me tips on the latch hooking process and what hairs to use and stuff like that. And not only him, if you ask a question in the Wookiee Builders Club, everyone will jump on it and just give their own opinions and like, hey, I bought my gloves from here. I did my feet process this way. I did this, I did that. And it was just it was just amazing. So Facebook groups and different costume groups, like, of that community can help you in the long run. Just because that also kind of helps you realize that you aren't alone in this process. I know when I first joined like the 501st and stuff like that, I really didn't know anyone going in. And back then I wasn't even part of a Facebook group. But when I started doing Chewy, I was like, I know I'm not alone. I know there's other people that have done this before. So if you are interested in doing any type of costume, just, for example, go and type up Mandalorian costume builders or whatever. And most likely there will be some type of group that will be there where people are doing 3D prints, people are doing resin, like people are doing foam. Like everyone has their own different way of doing costumes. So it's really good to have that open mind when you're going into it as well. It is different if you are trying to join the 501st or the Rebel Legion because they have more stricter guidelines for that. But But yeah, no, those Facebook groups go a long way. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Austin brought that up in the comments, and you kind of brought it up in what you were saying there too. The Facebook groups are a very good place to browse the general process or general availability of materials and resources for a specific costume. And especially when there's a new costume out there. I remember the Shore Trooper fam Facebook group that started up when the Rogue One trailers dropped. And before Rogue One even came out, people had Shore Trooper costumes ready to go. And that was a community effort to help each other learn and develop costume and all of that. So Facebook groups are a really fantastic resource for that. Like Colin said, just kind of Google whatever costume name builder group on Facebook, and that can be a really awesome resource. And the Facebook groups are kind of the modern version of forums, like I said before, because a lot of these forums would serve the same purpose. They have people logging all their steps of their build, their work in progress threads, and then from there, you can kind of start to get a feel for the general outline of the steps that a build will take.
On the topic of sort of like community groups helping build costumes, like in-person armor parties. So like I know the costuming clubs often give kind of a good platform to do this, but a lot of the things I've learned is through doing like armor parties where we'll all sit around and I'll look over and be like, oh my God, what is that tool you're using over there? That's so cool. And like, if you're new to cosplay or costuming and building stuff, sometimes you don't have the vernacular and like the lingo to be able to talk about what it is you're trying to do, how to get there, what tools you need, and you're just stuck. And so when you can see someone over there doing something that you're like, whoa, I got to do that. Like, that's cool. That's a good way to learn stuff too. I've learned a lot of my costuming skills from watching other people or from just like turning over to somebody and being like, I'm trying to get these two things to go together. Help. What would you do? And people are really helpful. And if you're not in sort of a community where there is kind of this place for like building together, if you can go to a con, and you see people in the costumes that you want to have or something similar, ask them, because I mean, I'm always super happy to talk to people, at conventions, about how I built my armor. So like literally physically turning over to people and being like, how did you do this paint? It's really cool. How did you do it? That's a really great way to learn too.
Yeah, I think that brings up another good point too, talking at cons, which sort of goes back to what I mentioned earlier about how to go about asking questions. Like, don't just ask something super broad. There's kind of a general like question asking etiquette. Like the vast majority of people in the community are very willing to help new people and help like share what they did and talk, because we're all nerds and we get excited about the stuff that we build. And we like to talk about it. You guys know I'll talk about droids for like 8 hours. But
that's a really low number based on conversations we had, Dom.
But you do also need to be cognizant of the time that people have too. Be like, hey, can I ask you a couple questions about this? Don't just like slap them with a question out of the blue. Or you can phrase questions like, hey, can you direct me to some resources to learn about this, or share like yourself, or share like methods that you use yourself. And I think that kind of facilitates more constructive discussion, just like being specific with your questions does. And that'll help you in the long run too, get better feedback and input from people. If they, I guess, and maybe this is me kind of speaking from my experience and point of view too. Like I am more likely to talk to someone about a build or like help them learn when they have a willingness to learn, and they're not just like, hey, give me this thing that you have, whether that be knowledge or the costume itself, we all like talking
Yeah.
about our costumes and stuff. So like,
Yeah.
just be excited about it. Like, kind of match other people's vibe, and it goes well.
Yeah.
There's definitely an aspect of if you ask vague questions, you get vague answers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't want any of this to seem like, because a very valid question is, hey, where do I start?
Mhm.
Yeah. It just
and-
depends on the costume.
Right. And these, like, I guess these comments that we're making aren't meant to discourage that. I don't want it to seem like
No,
that.
no.
But it's not
Yeah.
meant to discourage where, like, asking how to start. It's meant to structure your questions to better help you figure out where to start, I guess. I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah.
You know, this whole episode is probably us just kind of info dumping and might not make a ton of sense, but we're doing our best. So
I mean, I think anything that involves like kind of learning about like certain costumes and stuff goes a long way. And definitely, like, for example, if I was just starting, costume building and I was watching this, I would be like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. I didn't know that website existed. A
that's the goal
Facebook
of this
group.
podcast.
Yeah.
Right. It's just like, whoa, yeah. So guys, Star Wars Stuff Podcast. I mean, tell your friends, check us out.
Costume
Don't
stuff.
sign up for a Patreon. Yeah.
Or don't. I mean,
We still got to figure out an actual name.
Yeah.
we have a name.
We could potentially do like a poll on our story on Instagram and
Sure.
see if, and see what other people come up with. But yeah, I love the process of getting into something new with building, because a couple of years ago I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know about 3D printing or like, that latch hooking, anything really. And then also going to armor parties. If you have the opportunity to go to one, I would go to one. I've been a member for a long time, but every time I go to an armor party, I feel like I'm learning something new. Especially, for example, this past weekend, we all were at an armor party over at Hunters, and just looking at all the projects that everyone was working on, and sanding and just the different projects. It was so cool to watch how everyone's approach was so different on different things. So absolutely, if you have a chance, I would go to armor
and
party.
that can seem kind of daunting too. I get that it's kind of intimidating to reach out to people who may know more than you, or like you may not know well when you're getting into stuff. I run into that a lot with droid builder things. There's people who specifically know like the electronics and stuff way better than I could ever imagine. And like, even I get kind of like, I don't really know what to ask. So yeah, I get that it can be kind of intimidating, especially if you're going to try and join the 501st and want to attend an armor party or something. But it just kind of starts out with being friendly to people, I guess. If you want to join the 501st or attend one of the armor parties in your local area, reach out to your local membership liaison, your GML for your garrison. And they're generally pretty good about getting you squared away, hooking you up with someone or directing you towards a resource that can help you learn, or at least they should be, I should say.
There's also no shame in being a basement gremlin and just doing everything without like going to an armor party. Like I built my whole first costume just off of reading the forums, like every single day, not paying attention in class. And I finished it, and then I did my first, I only met people after I in person. After I finished the costume. So there's and definitely we all just did an armor party. There's inherently a benefit to going and hanging out with your friends and building stuff, but don't be afraid to work on stuff at home alone and just experiment and learn.
I learned how to build costumes by myself in my garage. I think that all depends on what type of learning style you are too. Like I know people who learn way better when there's someone showing them how to do something. but some people, like me personally, I would rather research myself online and like find pictures online than like go to a class, you know, because then I can kind of go at my own pace. Sometimes I feel like I get when there's a bunch of stuff being thrown at you really quickly. Sometimes I feel like that's not the best for me. So when I'm just sitting by myself doing research, that's oftentimes an easier and more methodical way for me to pick up a skill. And that's not to say that that method is any more valid than like going and taking a class on something. Sometimes if you have a local maker space, that can be a fantastic place to go learn. Some of them even have classes on cosplay stuff where you can just kind of go hang out, see what other classes they have that are on general skills that then can be applied to cosplay. All this type of hobby stuff, it's generally a combination of a bunch of skills that may not initially have been meant for building a suit of armor.
Well, kind of makes me think, like, I laughed at the beginning of this section saying that, like, I just go for it and I don't research. And, like, that's not entirely true, but there is an extent to, like, saying just try it in your basement. Like, do your research, work on it by yourself, go to an arm party, do whatever. But at some point, you know, your best research is sometimes going to be trying something and not getting it right and then doing it again. Make your own research. Like, sometimes that is
okay.
The best way to do it. And that also made me think, you just said that most of the tools that you use in cosplay are not intended for cosplaying. And so sometimes
almost none of them.
Yeah. So like if you know, like if you're trying to figure out like, oh my goodness, how do I get these two things to go together? Going back to like the basics of what the actual material is rather than just thinking about like, what does everyone in the like do for costuming? Sometimes if you can actually get more insight if you think about like, oh, what would this have been initially used for? And I've done that sometimes, and sometimes that doesn't work at all, but sometimes it does. There you go.
Yeah, there's definitely talking about tools for costuming, like knowing what material we're working with and finding out like, what are the basic tools that are associated with X or Y. As like a quick example, I wanted to learn leatherworking to build my Han Solo gun belt a few years back. How long was that? Some period of time that I don't remember ago. And it was like, you know, I watched like 3 tested videos on it and a few other leatherworking videos from like Tandy on it. And I was like, beforehand, all I knew was like, yes, you go to Tandy and buy leather. And that was all I knew. And it was like, okay, well, if I want to be able to sew leather, because Hans has sewing on it, what do I need? I need a punch. I need needles. I need thread. Great. Got that checked. It's nice to have glue. So it like sets what you're sewing beforehand. Okay, I'll get glue. And then it's like, okay, well, what tools do I need to cut the leather out to get the shapes I want? And then I want to be able to pattern it. I'll get some foam and I can like test it out. Testing is amazing, like doing small scale tests or using cheap fabrics or cheap foams to get an idea of how things fit or look. That's incredibly valuable. But it's like, you know, look at your costume, understand what the end result you want it to look like or what it needs to be, and just work back from that. It's like normally everything is pretty simple. There's an XYZ to get the end result. And if you can like look at something and be like
3 letters.
Yeah, sometimes it's like the entire alphabet, but you know, just being able to look at something and understand, oh, this is how these things should go together. I'm gonna look up and try and find an equivalent in a different world or a different hobby, and then work from there to find out how to make it work for you.
Yeah, like sometimes I learned a lot of weathering techniques and stuff, not from cosplay things, but from looking at model building stuff or diorama building stuff. So thinking of where other hobbies or skills are tangentially related can really be a good way to figure out more resources to learn from than just what are available within the costuming community.
Yeah, that's
And
also
sometimes your ideas might be, you know, just as good as someone else's advice. So don't be afraid to try something too.
Yep. Yeah, ask why a lot.
Yeah.
Not necessarily ask. I mean, it's always good to ask, like, what do I do? But for me, and it helps me learn more. I a lot of times ask, why do I do it this way? So,
Yeah.
like, I get a lot of questions about whether or not my armor is 3D printed or what, or a lot of people assume it's 3D printed. And when I say no and people ask why, I have a list of reasons. It's mostly due to like the durability, to how it needs to flex when you wear it. And like, that's the why, for the question of what material am I going to make this out of, you know? And there is a why to literally everything. I mean, like everything in general, but everything in costume building. So I think for me personally, that really helps, is to ask, why do I do something this way, instead of just what way to do something, you know? It helps me think about it more.
Yeah. I think we're getting ready to kind of wrap up here, but is there anything that you guys want to kind of leave the audience with about the research process that we maybe didn't touch on?
I think just understand it takes time. Like,
Yeah.
if you want to build a costume, don't just expect you're going to start it the next day. Even there's shipping times to account for, like, buying things.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe not for everyone.
Well, yeah, no, dude, I get that for sure. Because of, for example, latch hooking is a very long process.
Maybe for other people, Colin.
Yes. Whoa. Hang on now. It just depends on, you know, of what costume you're doing. And I think latch hooking is a very fine example of, like, you know, my first time doing it, honestly, it took a while because I didn't know what I was doing at first. But now, looking back at it, knowing all the stuff now, I can easily do it in a very shorter period. Just because I'm not going to be making mistakes along the way and stuff like that. So, and with latch hooking, it is a very repetitive process. And, you know, sanding can be like that too. You'll feel like you're sanding a piece for like a very long time and you're getting nowhere, but in reality you are. So it's just like patience, trust the process. If you have questions, ask people throughout the community. And you know, and don't forget at the end of the day of what your goal is, because for me, for Chewy, it was like, I'm picturing myself wearing the costume. I'm picturing how many people it's going to make happy. And you know, I love wearing Chewy all the time now. So it's just have that goal, remind yourself of why you're doing it, and have that thought process in the research as well. Just because, you know, sometimes the process can be repetitive, and I know we'll get to the actual, like, you know, building process and stuff like that in a future episode, but yeah.
For those who aren't aware, latch hooking is a fancy term for medieval torture.
That is false. Latch hooking is the process of like tying on a little grouping of fur or hair.
Yep, hair, yarn, yep, just all that stuff. And that's how they actually made the Chewbacca costume all the way back in 1976. So it was a lot of fun to go back and do that original process. I thought that was super cool. But yeah. Cool.
Well, on that note, I think we're wrapping up. So thanks everybody for watching. If you have feedback on like how we're covering the topics that we're covering, because we're kind of new to talking about this kind of thing, or if you have ideas for topics that you want us to discuss, feel free to reach out to the Star Wars Stuff Podcast social media pages, send us suggestions. You can reach out to any of us if you want to talk about something. Colin has a thing you can throw up on here with all our handles on Instagram and stuff. Message any one of us if you have suggestions about this segment of the Star Wars Stuff Podcast when we talk about costumes and stuff. Or if you have questions about costumes, I can confidently speak for everyone here. I think that we are all happy to talk about our costumes and talk you through getting going on something or answer a specific question or whatever.
Yeah. I think I'm in that process where like all I want to do is like really talk about it, but there's not that many people I know that really have done what I do. So it's just like I'm that person of the kind where I'm just like, are they interested in Chewy? Do they want to learn how to make Chewy?
Colin,
Please come talk to me.
literally everybody's interested in Chewy. Everybody
Well,
wants a hug.
I know. I just want to talk about it more. So this is a perfect outlet for that. But yeah. And then also non-related to this, but tomorrow Ray is back. Ray and I are back, and we are going to be breaking down all the news that we got today about Skeleton Crew, including the release date and why, you know, the species of Max Rebo has 4 limbs. It's going to be great. So excited. And then
I noticed how
also
you changed your argument that the species of Max Rebo has 4 limbs and not Max Rebo himself has 4 limbs.
That's true.
I
That
think
is a
you're looking way
change.
into that.
No,
I
you
think you're
changed
looking
your
into that.
claim.
You did.
No, I no.
It
no,
is.
I
Actually,
no,
that's a big
no,
change.
No, it's
Yeah.
not.
Because it could
No,
be
it's
that he was a
not.
weird mutant.
I
Or double
think Max
amputee.
Rebo is a balding double amputee. There, I said it. And on that note, we're done.
We will save that for our.
Yes.
official-
Plug the upcoming debate between Colin and Stax Rebo, where they will
Yeah.
discuss how many limbs Max Rebo has, and I will sadly be moderating this and have to sit through that discussion.
Yes. It is not going to be happening now. Due to our the person that I'm debating is sick, so
Nah,
we were
Colin
supposed to do it
wimped out.
tomorrow. But we will be doing it in the future, and it's probably going to be in a couple of weeks. But when it does, it's going to be the debate of the century. And I already told Hunter can't say whose side he's on, even though I know he's not going to be on my side. But he can't say squat during that debate.
I am just the moderator.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, boy.
With that being said,
Oh, boy, right.
with that being said, come back here tomorrow around 2:30 Eastern Standard Time to check all things out, Skeleton Crew and all the other Star Wars news. My name is Colin. My name is Josh. My name is Hunter. My name is Star. Awesome. Thank you guys. May the
Wow.
force be with you always.